You think you know what the American Wild West looked like. Cowboys galloping across the horizon, wide-brimmed hats, revolvers on their hips. Now close your eyes and picture that cowboy. What's the color of his skin? If you imagined a white man, Hollywood did its job. But the truth is quite different. 1 in 4 cowboys was black. And this isn't a statistic invented to sound progressive. It's a documented historical fact that was systematically erased from America's collective memory. This is the story of how that happened and why. The year is 1867. The Civil War ended just 2 years ago. On the plains of Texas, millions of heads of cattle roam free, ownerless, marketless, worthless. At the same time, in the industrialized North, there's an insatiable hunger for beef. The problem? 1,000 miles of inhospitable territory separating supply from demand. The solution would be the long cattle drives that would cross the heart of America. And who would do this brutal, dangerous, and poorly paid work? Any man willing to do it, regardless of skin color. In the decades after the Civil War, between 20 and 35,000 men worked as cowboys on the great cattle trails. Historical studies based on ranch records, payroll lists, and period accounts estimate that between 6,000 and 9,000 of these men were African American. That represents approximately 25% of the workforce. It wasn't the exception. It was the norm. On the trails leaving Texas, where the population of formerly enslaved people was substantial, the proportion was even higher. Some expeditions had half or more of their crew composed of black men. Why did so many black men become cowboys? The answer lies in the brutal economics of Reconstruction. Newly freed men desperately needed work. The cattle ranches in Texas didn't ask questions. Could you ride? Could you rope? Could you handle 18 hours a day in the saddle, eating dust, crossing freezing rivers, facing storms and stampedes? Then you had a job. The pay was miserable for everyone, about $25 to $40 a month, but it was money many black men had never seen in their lives. The cattle trails were, in a way, one of the few spaces of relative equality in post-Civil War America. Not because white men weren't racist, but because survival depended on cooperation. When 2,000 nervous cattle decide to stampede in the middle of the night, nobody asks the skin color of the man beside you. You trust him with your life, or die trying to do the job alone. Of course, racism didn't disappear. Black men frequently received the most dangerous or least desirable jobs. But on the trails, competence mattered more than anything else. Let's talk about one specific man. Nat Love was born enslaved in Tennessee in 1854. At 15, already free, he headed west. He ended up in Texas, where he learned the art of the cowboy. Love was exceptional. He mastered the art of roping, shooting, and riding. In 1876, at a rodeo competition in Deadwood, Dakota Territory, he defeated white, black, native, and Mexican competitors, earning the nickname Deadwood Dick. His autobiography, published in 1907, is one of the only first-hand accounts of a black cowboy's life. He describes gunfights, stampedes, encounters with Native Americans, and the brutal camaraderie of the trail. But Nat Love wasn't alone. There was Bill Pickett, who invented the technique of bulldogging, taking down a steer by biting its upper lip. There was Bose Icard, trusted cowboy of the legendary Charles Goodnight, who said about Icard, "He was my detective and banker for 4 years on the trail, the most trustworthy man I ever knew." There were hundreds, thousands of others whose names were never recorded, whose stories were never told, but who did the work that built the American West. So what happened? Why, when we think of cowboys, don't we see these men? The answer has 2 parts, and both are deliberate. First part, Jim Crow and segregation. In the 1880s and 1890s, the era of the great cattle drives was coming to an end. Barbed wire closed the open plains. Railroads took cattle directly from ranches to slaughterhouses. The cowboys' work changed. And as American society resegregated under Jim Crow laws, black men were systematically excluded from new jobs on ranches, especially work with horses, which was seen as more noble. They were pushed into poorly paid agricultural work or into cities. And with them, their stories began to disappear. Second part, Hollywood. In 1903, the first Western, The Great Train Robbery, showed white bandits and white heroes. In the following decades, Hollywood transformed the American West into mythology. And in that mythology, there was no room for racial complexity. Cowboys were white, virtuous civilizers of the savage frontier. This narrative served a clear political purpose: to glorify white expansion westward, justify the taking of indigenous lands, and erase the contributions of anyone who wasn't white. Films like Stagecoach from 1939, High Noon from 1952, and television series like Bonanza and Gunsmoke cemented the image of the white cowboy in American consciousness. For decades, millions of children grew up watching John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, and Gary Cooper. None of them played a black cowboy, because none of them existed, according to Hollywood. There were rare exceptions. In 1972, the film Buck and the Preacher, starring Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte, told the story of black cowboys helping former slaves migrate west. But it was too late. The image was already engraved. The cowboy was white, period, and the erasure wasn't just cinematic. History books ignored black cowboys. Western museums excluded them from exhibitions. Even rodeos, direct descendants of the competitions that men like Nat Love dominated, became predominantly white spaces, with subtle and not-so-subtle barriers to entry for black competitors. The result is that generations of Americans, white and black, grew up not knowing that their ancestors rode side by side on the cattle trails. That the economic foundation of the American West was built by black hands as much as white ones. That the image of the solitary white cowboy is a fantasy, a 20th century invention, not a 19th century reality. Why does this matter? Because stories shape identities. When you erase the presence of a group of people from the national narrative, you erase their humanity, their contribution, their right to belong. For black children, knowing that their ancestors were cowboys, that they tamed the West as much as any white man, is an act of reclaiming dignity. And for all of us, acknowledging the truth is an act of historical honesty. There's a famous photograph taken around 1890 of a crew of cowboys on a ranch in Texas. 7 men stand, some with wide-brimmed hats, others with bandanas around their necks, all wearing clothes dirty from days on the trail. 3 of them are black, 2 are white. One appears to be Mexican, another perhaps Native American. They're not segregated. They stand side by side, looking directly at the camera with the same tired and proud expression. That photograph is truer about the Old West than any John Wayne film. The American West wasn't tamed by solitary white men with a sense of justice. It was conquered, for better or worse, by a messy mixture of desperate, ambitious, courageous, and brutal people. Freed black men looking for a new life, Irish immigrants fleeing famine, Mexicans who lived on these lands before they became American, Native Americans trying to survive genocide. And yes, white men too, some heroic, many violent, all trying to survive in an unforgiving environment. Nat Love ended his life not on the trails, but as a Pullman train porter, a respectable job, but far from the wild freedom he once knew. He died in 1921 in Los Angeles, just before Hollywood transformed the West into legend. He never lived to see his story erased, but he also never lived to see it rediscovered. Because it is being rediscovered. Historians are unearthing records. Museums are correcting exhibitions. Recent films and series, like The Harder They Fall, are bringing black cowboys back to screens, even if in fictional form. The truth, as always, is stranger and richer than the myth. The Old West was a place of brutal contradictions. It could be simultaneously freer and more violent than anywhere else in America. For newly freed black men, the trails offered something rare, the chance to be judged by their ability, not by the color of their skin. It wasn't justice. It wasn't equality. But it was a sliver of possibility in a country that denied them almost everything. And perhaps that's what we should remember. That American history is always more complicated than the myths we tell. That heroism has no color. That injustice can coexist with moments of unexpected humanity. And that erasing people from history doesn't make them less real. It only makes our memory poorer. So, the next time you watch a Western or imagine a cowboy riding into the sunset, remember, there's a 1 in 4 chance that man was black. And his story deserves to be told. This documentary is based on historical research and verifiable sources. To overcome the lack of visual records from the era, images and videos generated by artificial intelligence were used to illustrate and dramatize historical events, seeking maximum possible fidelity.